Greetings, everyone. This is Ben Wabuke, and this is Socratic Discourse, where we say we follow the argument wherever it leads. So today I'm with a friend of mine here. He's called Amos Nato. I think I will introduce him with some Islamic dilemma music there, some bit of reggae. Then we will continue with our session. Anyway, karibu sana Nato. It's good to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So today's session is on does religion poison everything? So let's welcome you. So does religion poison everything? That is going to be the topic of our discussion today with our brother Amos Nato. He did a paper. He has written a paper examining Christopher Hitchens' book. What is the title of the book, Amos Nato? Or maybe let me ask you to introduce yourself, Kwanzaa, before we go to the title of the book.
That's good. My name is Amos Nato. Glad to be here. Married to Damaris, and I work with an organization called Trinity Fellowship based in Nairobi Garden Estate. We do discipleship among students in campuses and high schools. And that is what we do. I also love apologetics as an avenue for evangelism and discipleship, especially among young people in schools. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great, great. You're the one who introduced me to apologetics. I still remember that.
Interesting. Oh, when I gave you the book of
John Lennox.
John Lennox.
It was the basic Christian concepts and then the evidence that demands a verdict.
I'm glad, and I know I've taken it up.
Yeah.
Probably a notch higher than me.
I've never stopped since then.
Interesting.
Yeah, good. So I must say by the way, I was so excited when I read your paper. I was so excited with the way you approached the whole issue. Maybe just to start, to know what is it that really prompted you to write about the book. So you can tell us the title of the book that we are discussing about, and then tell us the reason as to why you decided to go that route.
I knew the person who wrote the book is titled God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. It's written by an atheist who was called Christopher Hitchens. Unfortunately, he passed on the year 2012 due to cancer. I knew Christopher Hitchens some time back. I used to love his debates. He was quite interesting when you listen to him. Content-wise is something else we can talk about, but in terms of knowing how to master the debate, he was good at it. Yeah, rhetoric. And he was good with sarcasm. So I love such things. So that is how I knew him. So when I discovered that he had written a certain book, I looked for it, I didn't get it. So one time I was walking along the streets of Nairobi, and then I got it. Interestingly, I bought it at 200 shillings. Then I got it, and there is some studies we are doing. So we were told if we have a topic to debunk, we can do that. So I said, let me debunk what Christopher Hitchens has written, that God is not great. So I titled my research paper as Hitchens' God. I think I'll talk about that later on.
Yeah, that's good. And because the Hitchens was an atheist, isn't it?
Yes.
Probably he was an atheist even during to the point of his death. So he died an atheist, right?
Yes.
So I think the place just to start is first to begin by asking ourselves, what is atheism? Some people have said that atheism is just lack of belief. So what really is the definition of atheism?
Yeah, there are some new atheists who have come and they're redefining atheism. They're saying atheism is a lack of belief. That is a very subtle shift. If you're not keen, you may never realize it, but it's a very subtle shift from what historically we have known what atheism is. Because historically, right from the Greeks to the Romans to the early probably 20th century, atheism has been defined as someone who holds a belief in the inexistence of God. But now some people, especially with the new atheism, they're coming up with another definition that it is basically a lack of belief. So that is a very subtle shift. And the problem I have with the current definition of atheism is what they're doing is they have discovered it is hard to debunk the whole issue of God. So they're trying to shift the topic of the argument to something else. So when you say that atheism is a lack of a belief, then you are saying, I do not actually hold a worldview. So I do not have the burden of proof to prove the inexistence of God. You are actually the one who has the burden of proof to prove to us God's existence. So they will do nothing. They'll give you the work of coming up with the proofs of God's existence. The only work will be critiquing you, because you can't critique someone who does not have a belief. So the assumption is we are born atheists, which is actually not true. So that is the subtle shift that has begun. But traditionally, historically, atheism has been a belief in the inexistence of God. anyone who does not believe in the existence of God is termed as an atheist. And that has its own historical roots. Yes.
And it's actually, if you define atheism as a mere lack of belief, that will make cows atheists too. No, because or
Yes,
even
yes,
rocks
yes.
atheists, because they also lack belief.
Yes. They also lack belief. Animals are atheists. They lack a belief. Anything can be. But probably they usually don't think about the logical conclusion of such statements or such things. So they just come up. You see, the whole issue is just debunking the whole aspect of who God is. But they never think the logical end of the arguments.
Absolutely. And so, why are you a Christian and not an atheist, for that matter?
An interesting one. I'm not an atheist. I've found out that being an atheist is a hard work because you are going against the grain. The first question you asked me, why is it that some people are saying that atheism is a lack of belief? Simply because I've come to find out, I found out that coming up with the proofs of the inexistence of God, it's pretty hard.
You
It
can't
goes
prove a
against,
negative, isn't it?
you
Difficult.
can't prove a negative. Yeah. So it's hard work. And I just can't do that. It goes against human nature. Because even as the Bible says, we know God. Romans 1, it says, though they knew God. Yeah. So it goes against human nature. And coming up with proofs can be pretty exhaustive, really. Yes.
Frank Turek has written a very good book called "Stealing from God,"
Yes.
where he says that atheists have to steal standards from God in order to argue against Him.
Absolutely. In fact, some of them have said, like Richard Dawkins, who says he's a Christian atheist. I used to wonder what that means, but I understand him.
I think he will talk about that. He calls himself a cultural atheist.
Atheist, yes.
Now, you termed your paper Hitchen's God. I'm curious, why did you go for that title? Why did you go for the title Hitchen's God? Small.
Hitchens is quite sarcastic, but humorized in a very evil way, in a very bad way. When I was reading the book, God is Not Great, I came to the conclusion that the God that Christopher Hitchens is talking about is not the Christian God. You know, he termed himself as a Protestant atheist. So primarily, he debunks the Christian God and primarily the Protestant God, even not the Catholic God, as he says. So I came to realize he's not talking about because I'm a Protestant, he's not talking about the Protestant God. Probably talking about Baal or Molech or another God that he's not talking about the Christian God. That is the point. So in that paper, I came to that conclusion. So what I did is he comes up. Let me sum it up this way. He redefines actually Christianity. He redefines the Christian God. He comes up with proofs against that God, and then he goes ahead trying to woo people to buy into those arguments. But I don't see the whole aspect of him debunking the Christian God I know from the Bible. So I termed the paper Hitchens God because that is not our God.
So actually, if I can quote you right here, you says that he basically wages war against an unknown God.
An unknown God, probably the one that was found in Athens.
So he accuses Christians of making a God in their own image. But in other words, you're saying that the God that Christian Hitchens is talking about is a God in his own image.
He has created, yeah, that's true. He has created a God in his own image. He claims that religious people have created a God in their own image. But what he does the same, if there is such an error, but he does the same mistake by creating a God in his own image and actually coming up with non-existent proofs against him.
So he creates a God and then attacks the God.
Attacks the God. And I realize he's not talking about my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Now let's get to the meat of what you wrote in your paper.
Yes.
And from the many atheists, like I think in your paper you've mentioned the likes of Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, and these other ones. They call themselves the four horsemen of the new atheism, and Daniel Dennett, right?
Yes, yes.
So why Hitchens? What prompted you to read Hitchens and respond to him?
As I said earlier on, I am inclined towards sarcasm. Why? I love people like Chesterton. If you have read Chesterton, I love his books. He was also a journalist. He was a journalist. So the writing is quite similar. So when I got his book, I got interested to read it. to see his arguments against, especially Christianity. I know there is a book by Richard Dawkins, and he's part of the New Atheist movement, God's Delusion, but I didn't really think about it deeply. I wanted to read one for Hitchens because of my love for him and his humor, his kind of writing. I got interested in it. That is why I read that book and went ahead to debunk it, really. So Hitchens was quite an interesting person. You can actually watch him on YouTube in his debates with the likes of William Lane Craig. He has debated quite a number of Christians. So you can go ahead and watch those debates. Even as some people have said, even in, because he used to drink a lot and smoke a lot, even in his drunkenness, he was quite an intelligent guy. Even in his
Yeah.
drunkenness,
Yeah.
he would still actually come up, he would still hold a debate. He was that good. So I really loved him in that regard. You are muted.
Sorry, I was saying that I got to know Hitchens through the debate they had with John Lennox.
Okay.
Of course, I think John Lennox did well in the debate.
Yeah, he did. You know, the new atheism is quite different. It's it doesn't have the solid proofs. It does not have solid arguments against religion. So if you watch those debates, you just love their way of debating. But really, when you talk about the meat of the discussion, you can't find it.
Yeah. All right. Good. So from your reading of the book, what will you say are some of his main arguments? So maybe we can just take maybe like one at a time and then a response to it. Because I was to ask you a question on how you will generally assess his arguments, but I think we can just like take one at a time. What are his main arguments, and then we can address each at a time, and then later, I think, as we proceed, we will talk about some of the fallacies that he commits in his book when he talks about.
Hitchen's main argument, you can get that from the title of the book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. His main problem is the evil nature of religion. That is the main thing. That's the main thing for Hitchens. And something when you're reading Hitchens' book or other Hitchens' arguments, they're quite experiential by nature. He gives a lot of testimonies of what he encountered as he did his journalism across the world and his experiences, how he encountered different religions and the extremes of those religions. So primarily, Hitchens' argument against religion is its evil nature. You can go, please go and read. When you open that book, you will see how he titles the chapters of that book. For instance, chapter 1, he calls it Religion Kills. Chapter 2, Why Heaven Hates Harm. Religion can be hazardous. The nightmare of the Old Testament. You can see what Hitchens is actually talking about. So Hitchens' main argument is the evil nature of religion and how religion, and he says it, religion is the root cause of all evil in the world. And if you obliterate religion, you stamp out the root of all evil. That is basically his argument. So he also talks about the whole aspect of how religion is against science, but that is a very secondary argument for Christopher Hitchens.
So, and does he like define what he means by religion? Because I also saw one of your contentions here is that Hitchens doesn't seem to really give a clear definition of what he means by religion.
He doesn't. One of the things he
Yeah.
does is he lumps all religions together. In fact, he says all totalitarian regimes are religious by nature. So he says Hitler was religious, Kim Jong un of North Korea is religious, and all these totalitarian regimes were religious. So that is how he defines religious in that regard. But he goes ahead again and says someone who holds a belief in God is a religious person. So, and then thirdly, he talks about the organized religion like Catholicism, like Islam, like Christianity. It lumps all those things together as religious. So
Yeah.
for him, the name religion is quite fluid. You cannot get him on that. What does he really mean by religion? And so the underpinning of his treatise is that he lumps all religions together and hopes to come up with a unified definition of what religion is, which is pretty hard.
So if his definition is fluid, then we can probably apply the same definition of religion to atheism and say atheism is also a religion of some kind.
We can, yeah. That is a conclusion. Then atheism is also religion. It's a religion because it meets the criteria that he has actually described.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's good. That's good. Now, in your paper, you mentioned that Hitchens is a materialist. Okay,
Yes.
and if I can quote you right here, you says that you quote him. You say that when you're talking about his determinism, you quote him and say that he says we have every reason to think that earthly things are all we have, or are the things we have you're going to have, or very going to have. And continues, phenomena can be explained in natural terms. Is materialism spreads its tentacles to ethics, human consciousness, and religion. He asserts that religion can be explained in naturalistic terms, specifically in Freudian psychology. The kind of reductionism is self-refuting and appalling. Maybe you can make a comment about his materialism and why you think that is a problem.
I love what Peter Kraft, he's written a book called Socratic Logic, and he says that if someone holds to materialism, high chances are he's also an atheist, and high chances he's also a nominalist, and high chances are he's also a Darwinian probably, or a Freudian, or something like that. So he says all those things go hand in hand. So primarily, Hitchens is a materialist. He does not believe in the supernatural realm. So that one, I saw it as a root, as a ground that affects everything else that affects the human endeavors. Like one of the things it will affect his understanding of religion, his understanding of ethics, his understanding of morality. So he does not believe in the supernatural realm. Interestingly, he says that he talks about human consciousness and he debunks the Christian view of human consciousness. But interestingly, again, he does not give a basis of human consciousness in a materialistic perspective. So they do not have that perspective or rather framework to explain some of these things that are not material by nature. So he reduces everything to material, to something, to things physical. So that one affects all other perspectives, or rather all other, especially metaphysical perspectives of these aspects of human nature. So that is what I see as a root that defines, or rather that puts, let me put it like materialism in his way, puts boundaries to everything that he believes about human nature and God and the supernatural realm. So it has gone ahead and affected his view about ethics, as I said, his view about morality. So he does not give a competing framework to explain that, but he tries to explain that from a materialistic point of view. And that is understandable because he's an atheist who believes in Freud and Darwin.
It is interesting. It is interesting that actually Hitchens will go the way of saying that religion has Freudian psychology can explain religion. Don't you think we can actually turn the argument and say, I think atheism is also a psychological reaction. It is a psychological
Yes,
because it can go both ways. Don't you think so?
absolutely. One of the things that he does not know is that if you do not hold to the truth, you end up contradicting yourself, end up contradicting himself. So he explains human behavior through Freudian psychology and all sorts of things, as because Freud said that why people are pursuing God is because they lacked probably a father figure in their life. So they want a heavenly father figure. That is what he said. And they're longing for that. And probably atheism is a disdain for a heavenly father. Probably they had, we can also say that probably they had issues with their father figures. And so they don't want anything fatherly from that perspective. We can actually put it that way. So Freud can actually explain either way, either those people who love religion or those people who hate religion. So you can explain it either way using his psychology.
Actually, you're right. Someone has written um, has written a book called let me check the book out. Someone has written a book. It's called Paul Viz. Actually, Paul Viz has written a book says with the title "Faith of the Fatherless: The Psychology of Atheism." And one of the arguments he makes in that book, in fact, according to the research that he has done, he has said that actually many of the atheists had problems with their fathers growing up, and that's
Ah,
why you can even make the correlation. You can make the correlation between their bad relationship they had with the father. Some of them just fathers were absent, and the way they react to the idea of the heavenly father. Is a good book for someone to read.
okay.
Now, how does Hitchens materialism square up with the issue of conscience? Because if I understand materialism very well, materialism means that everything is material, right?
Yes,
Everything is physical in nature, but we know there are things which are not material.
yes.
So how does his materialism square up with things that we know very well are not material, like consciousness or soul and things like
As I said, when you read his book, especially when I was reading the chapter about the metaphysical claims of religion, I thought he will come up with something framework to explain actually what religion posits, but he does not in a way. There is only at one point he says that all these things can explain in Freudian psychology. That is what he says.
that?
So he does not have a way of explaining that. He leaves you hanging. leaves you hanging. Largely what you'll see from his book, it's an attack and a moral critique of religion, but not really giving something solid, or rather philosophical, that can help you now ground you in wanting to buy his argument that actually God is not great. So in no way does he give any competing framework. He only reduces, and it is only a very brief portion. So nowhere will you find that. So he can't explain it. Can't explain it.
Yeah, because it goes against his worldview, isn't it?
It goes against his worldview. He can't. He
It goes
can't
against his worldview. Yeah.
because he's a
You
Marxist. He was a Darwinian evolutionist. So if you combine those two, there are things he cannot explain.
cannot explain. Okay.
Yes.
You also talked about Hitchens' determinism. So does his view on materialism naturally or logically lead to determinism? Because you say that he decries the Calvinism and Islamic determinism, but there's also a problem with his materialistic worldview with the determinism. Will you shed more light on that?
Yes, Hitchens was a determinist. There is a quote that you can find it in the internet. I don't know who asked him, but someone asked him if he believed in free will. He said, "Of course we have free will because we have no choice but to have it." That is what he said. And if you are an evolutionist and you believe in Marxism, I believe consequently you'll be a determinist. You'll not believe in free will. So the interesting thing that I saw from his critique is that he critiqued a lot the fatalism that you see in extreme Calvinism and Islam. Yet, I kept on wondering, hasn't he seen the fatalism that is in Marxism and evolutionism? That's the interesting part. Because evolution says that we are, it's an unguided force that leads us to nowhere. So, if you believe in evolution, definitely, I believe so, you'll be a determinist. So, he does not believe in actually free will. Interestingly, as I said, he says he's not a moral relativist. That is what he says. So, there are lots of contradictions when you read his book. So, you can't actually get him where he is. And as we said earlier on, these people are trying to posit a certain worldview, but it is unlivable. You can't live it. You can't live it.
Yeah.
So that is a contradiction I see in his work. He's propagating freedom. He says Christianity and probably all religions that are against freedom. But his worldview is a number one.
Cannot allow for freedom.
It cannot allow for freedom. It can't by nature. And the freedom he's enjoying is because of the Christian worldview in Europe and America largely.
Absolutely.
That is what he says. But Dawkins was quite humble enough to admit that he's. I saw that interview that he's a Christian atheist. He said that. And so someone had asked him, "Are you a 100% atheist?" He said, "No, I'm not. I'm like 90% atheist." And then he said that, having lived in Europe, he can term himself as a Christian atheist because the worldview he uses is a Christian worldview. And that was quite humble of him. And we know he's not that humble as we know him.
He terms himself as a cultural Christian.
Yes, I've read that somewhere else.
But materialism really is problematic if you think about it, because
Yes,
if your actions are determined, you can't blame anyone, because
you cannot.
whatever they are doing is just but a result of the determined evolutionary process.
Yes,
And Hitchens and the people in his camp, the atheists who hold on Darwinism and the evolutionary process, you have to say that morality will change, because essentially what happens in evolution is change, isn't it?
yes,
And so you can't really ground morality in something which is unchanging.
yes.
And that is a problem. So you can't hold anyone accountable for the actions, because the
You
actions are
cannot.
determined by the evolutionary process.
Yes,
Then you cannot even ground morality in something which is external. So
yes.
don't you think that one flies in his face when he tries to critique religion? Because on what grounds is he critiquing religion, so to say?
On what grounds? Yeah. Someone said, if we are all determined as Hitchen posits, then all my belief is determined. Therefore, even the materialist belief in no way is different from belief in God, morality, or in little green men at the bottom of the garden. So he's saying, then if he believes in determinism, not all of us are determined. I'm determined to be a religious person. He's determined to be an atheist. So what are you saying?
Mhm.
When he's writing that book, on what ground should I believe him? Because he's been determined to write that book that way. So actually, it is not him saying that. Something else is saying that. Probably the neurons in his head, but there is not saying it. So
Absolutely.
that is the contradictions. Those are the contradictions that you find, especially if
So he,
someone holds such a view.
I also think I also saw in your paper you talked about how Hitchens views um, faith and science, and I think it's a problem that many um, actually don't think is a problem that many people do come up with, and saying that science and Christianity uh, don't go together. I think let me just quote what you said here. You say that Hitchens tend to pitch faith, religion, and science, faith and reason, philosophy and religion as mutually exclusive entities. It is an either-or fallacy. On religion, he comes up with sweeping sentiments hostile to free inquiry and all cases, the findings of science, and far more inspiring than the rantings of the godly. Now, do you think think he's right when he says that religion sort of is in direct contradistinction with science? So, in other words, if science is over here and then religion is over here, you can't really reconcile those two.
That is a fallacy he comes up with, that religion is on this end, science is on this end, faith is on this end, reason is on this end, religion is on this end, philosophy is on this end. So he comes up with those distinctions, which are actually fallacious, because these
False
things,
dichotomy, so to say.
yeah, they're false dichotomies. What did I want to say? So they're false dichotomies. That's quite true. So he distinguishes those perspectives in that regard, unfortunately. For me, as I was reading him, I found out that he has a wrong understanding of science. He has a wrong understanding of faith. He has a wrong understanding of religion, as we began saying. So he has a wrong understanding of all these things. So he says, there is a place where he says that anything that outrages reason, they distrust it. So that he says religion actually outrages reason and science. That is what he says. So failing to understand that at the heart, at the foundation of science is faith. Yeah. Even the person he loves, and I saw him quoting, I read him quoting him, that is Einstein. Einstein, though we can't say he was a religious person or rather theist, but he believed in faith. And he saw the importance of faith in the whole venture of science, because there are many things science assumes, and you assume something by faith. That is faith. Faith is the evidence of
The
faith.
way,
Basically, as we define it, is based on evidence.
yeah,
It's based on proofs. In fact, that is what the Bible says in the book of Hebrews. So he has a wrong understanding of what science is, failing to realize that science is based, that the foundations of science is faith. And he also thinks people who hold on to faith, or rather religious people, do not believe in reason. That is also quite untrue. Sorry. I wanted to see how Hitchens engages, especially the historical apologists of the Christian faith. He does nothing of a sort, of the sort. He does not talk even about someone like Thomas Aquinas, Blaise Pascal. You see, those Christian apologists of the historical Christian faith. He does not engage those conversations and those arguments, like now Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways. He does not engage in them. So, because Thomas Aquinas is someone whom I find who treated that subject quite well of faith and reason is Thomas Aquinas. He just mentions him in passing, but he does not handle him quite effectively. So those are the things that I see in him. And he also has a wrong understanding of scientists. So in one way or another, most of his definitions are fluid. Sometimes you cannot. He assumes, or rather he presumes, that all scientists or majority of the scientists are atheists, which is wrong. In fact, there was a poll that was done as recent that probably 15 years ago, and they found out that 40% of top scientists were actually religious. But the way he talks about it, it seems like anyone who is a scientist is non-religious or irreligious. So that is his thinking. So he's flawed in many ways, both on the whole aspect of faith, religion itself, science. What he holds to, as someone said, he holds to scienticism.
scientism.
Yes, he holds to that thing, which distrusts anything supernatural. That is different from science. You see, science is objective or should be objective. But scientists may not be objective because no one is objective. All of us are biased in one way or another. We can only reduce our subjectivity, but all of us are biased in one way or another. In fact, John Piper says absolute objectivity only belongs to God. So scientists are not objective, really. They also have their own biases, and especially scientists who are atheists. They are really subjective. I've seen, as I come to an end of that discussion, I've seen some debates where a Christian apologist and probably an atheist they're debating. And then this Christian apologist tells this atheist that if I gave you the proofs, convincing proofs that God exists, will you believe? And most of them said no. So is that a worthy debate? So you're debating with someone who is not pursuing the truth, really. He's already
He says
determined.
they're not open.
He's already determined.
We say, he say his materialism was already determined.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. So, but if you want
Science,
probably to read more about science and faith, probably Dawkins gives a better treatise than Hitchens. I would think
yeah,
so.
I think we can actually do another video on that, on faith versus
Yes,
science or faith versus
yes,
reason. I loved what you mentioned about Thomas Aquinas. His definition of faith and reason is quite telling. He says that reason is believing things on demonstration. In other words, we can
yes.
demonstrate. A, if A, then B.
Mm,
A, therefore B. That
yeah,
is like believing things on demonstration. But
yes.
he says faith is believing things on authority, and he gives an example. He actually says that you will say in most cases that seeing is better than hearing, but he says if the person we are listening to can see far much better, then listening is better
Yes,
than saying we want to see. And so
yes,
he says faith is trust in authority,
yes.
but reason is believing things on demonstration. And I also loved what you said about scientism, because scientism is the view that science explains everything. But do you think science explains everything?
It does not. Science by nature is a discipline that is limited.
Mhm.
Science only works on things that can be seen, can be observed, can be analyzed. So, on the whole issue of probably the resurrection of Christ, you can't actually use science. You see, something that can be repeatable, that is the nature of science. You see, there are things that happened once that cannot be repeated. So, science is limited in trying to give proofs for such things. It's limited. It's a worthy venture, but it's limited. So, science will need something else. So, when a scientist who claims to believe in who believes in scientism, what we have said, if he goes from science as we know it to the whole matter of religion, God's in existence, and all sorts of things, then he's ceasing to be a scientist. Probably he's now religious in that regard or a philosopher. So science is limited by nature, just like philosophy is also limited by nature, just like psychology is also limited by nature. All of these things need each other. Just like if I want to know this food is poisonous, I can't use philosophy. Do I?
Yeah,
No, I use
you have
science.
to use the tools of science.
Yeah.
John Lennox has written a very interesting book. It's a small book like this. It's called "Can Science Explain Everything?"
Okay.
And in that book, he gives an example. He says that when I when I bake a cake, the reason for that, I mean, when I bake a cake, can can science tell me why I have made the cake? And it says no, science cannot tell you why I've made the cake. The best science can do is to analyze the chemical and the components that were used in making the cake.
Yes.
But I am the only one who can tell you why I made the cake. So he says that sometimes people confuse between agency and mechanism. And he says
Oh,
that what science does is explaining how the universe does work.
oh
But
yes.
science cannot tell you why the universe
It will.
is there. And I also noticed in your paper you said that science cannot even explain itself.
It cannot. It needs philosophy. It can't. That's the beginning point. It cannot explain itself.
Yeah.
If I come here and say
What
science explains it, if I come here and tell you science explains everything, how can I test that statement scientifically? You can't.
absolutely, it's not
You can't.
that statement itself is not a scientific statement, right?
It's not a scientific statement. It's like on the last point you have said about was it Thomas Aquinas? But there is somewhere I was watching a debate between Richard Dawkins and someone, I forget the apologist, the Christian apologist. I think it was John Lennox. John Lennox asked him, Dawkins, do you believe your wife loves you? He stuttered. He said, yes. How do you know? Is it by science? No, it's by faith. Really, it is. You can't prove that scientifically. So he lives by faith, yet he denies the whole venture of faith.
You can actually make an argument and say that the scientific enterprise is a faith enterprise.
It is. It is.
When doing experiments, you have to believe that things are going to work. And all of us are people of faith by nature.
All of us.
The example I like giving is that when you go to the chemist to buy medicine, you don't first do testings on those medicine to confirm if there's poison inside, or not. What you do is you trust the chemist. You have faith that that is going to be okay.
Absolutely. And that is what these atheists are doing with science. They're actually misinterpreting science. If you take science the way these atheists are taking science, ultimately you end up with skepticism and extreme skepticism. Because as one person said, we don't approach life in the way that everything is guilty until we prove it innocent. No, we approach life in the other way around. Everything is innocent until we prove it guilty. But you see, now with this kind of science that we're going to see, as you say, it's quite, it's an extreme skepticism. So you end up in that way. And you see, that is also, as we said, it's unlivable. You can't live such a life. Yes.
Hitchens' view on history. He says that obviously, Hitchens believes in objectivity of history. However, he views history from a biased materialistic lens. Strangely enough, he seems to believe in the Gnostic Gospels. Please, will you make a comment on that? Really, I found that to be very interesting.
Hitchen says somewhere, he says that the Gnostic Gospels, like the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Barnabas, which most Christians don't believe in. He says that they give a better account of Christianity than the Gospels. Now, that is interesting. So he believes in their historicity, but he cannot believe in the historicity of the true Gospels. So on what grounds? That was my question. On what grounds? He does not say anything anyway in that regard, but on what grounds? So
So he doesn't give an argument for the historicity of the
he
Gnostic
does
Gospels.
not. He does
He
not.
just takes them for granted.
He takes them for
Then he
granted
pitches that against the historicity of the Gospels,
of the
of the New
gospel.
Testament.
Now, that is quite unprofessional and an academic in a way. This is what Ravi Zacharias once said: these people are good at destroying but not building. They're not there to build anything, actually. They're there to destroy anything they find. And they will do whatever they want to do to destroy, rather to pull it down. So his historicity, or whatever we call historiography, is quite distorted and very biased. For instance, at one point he says there was a certain professor, university professor, who was a strong Christian. He was called Dwight. He says that, for instance, Christianity has been against science. You see, like Dwight was against polio vaccination. And this is a person whom Christians adore. In fact, he called him a divine, a Christian divine, in a very sarcastic way. Now, interestingly, I read somewhere, and Alistair McGrath was saying, at the same time, he fails to remember that Bernard Shaw, who was a contemporary of Dwight, also was against science, but he does not raise that thing. So he's quite biased in his historical interpretation.
I see.
So he doubts the historicity of the Old Testament. He believes in the documentary hypothesis, if you know it. He even does not believe that there was a historical person called Jesus. He does not believe in that. He does not believe now, if he doesn't believe in the historicity of the Bible, then he does not believe in the journey of the Jews. And interestingly, his mother was a Jewess. As the interesting part. His mother was a Jewess. He contradicts himself in many points.
You say that his main contention is how religion has been actually the cause of evil, and such. Like I was actually there was that have been fought, and actually realized that a big percentage of the wars that have been fought is actually non-religious. Let me just see if I can confirm that here. Non-religious wars actually form a bigger percentage, and I also think you alluded to that. From the encyclopedia of wars actually says that out of the 1,700 over 10,000 years, religiously motivated or affiliated wars only comprise of around 7% in total. And you also talked about in your paper, you talked about how he referred to people like Hitler as religious. Do you think he's just being insincere there? Because the Nazis killed like 17 million people. The Soviet Union, around 23 million people died. And in China, between 1943 and 1976, had like 17 million people killed. Were those religious, or were those guys influenced by Darwinism and atheistic materialism?
As I said earlier on, Hitchens has this subtle habit of redefining truth, redefining history, redefining terms. So he deals a lot with the fallacy of equivocation. He does that a lot. So he goes ahead, and probably I alluded that in my paper, to say that Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who fought against Nazism, was a humanist. Yet he terms all atheists as humanists. So he says Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther King Jr., all of these guys were humanists. They were not really religious. That is what he says. Now, who doesn't know that Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a was a Christian? Who doesn't know that Martin Luther King Jr. was a reverend, was a pastor? And now he goes ahead and says, then Hitler, Pol Pot, and all sorts of guys who were Stalin, all of these guys were religious people. In fact, he goes ahead. He does not say primarily that Hitler was a Christian, but he alludes to that strongly because he says even the church supported him. And true, the church supported him. That was a state church. But true Christians were
Yeah,
fighting
yeah,
against the corrupted church. If you
absolutely.
read that history, and everyone, self evident, everyone knows that. So he goes ahead to redefine those things. Yet we know from history, these guys, even from the books that were written, like the one that was written by Hitler, Mein Kampf, you follow his thought, it was atheistic, it was Marxist, it was Darwinian, all those things. When you read those books, when you read what Stalin wrote and how they killed Christians in Russia, millions of them. So, yet he does not say that. Only at one point, he says that only probably in Albania, that is where the state tried to embrace atheism, but it failed.
Yeah,
Only Albania? You've not talked about China and most of these Eastern European countries? And then probably you do not know history or you're trying to redefine history. These guys were definitely atheists. They were not.
yeah.
Probably Putin is more religious than them.
You see what is interesting? There is a documentary done, I think, by Discovery Institute. It's called Human Zeus, and there is a book that has been written by um, there's a book that has been written here called The Astonishing Life of Otabenga. Otabenga Otabenga was an African who was taken and actually put in a zoo. And the reason as to why that happened is because of Darwinism, by the way. If you embrace Darwinism and you be an ardent follower of Darwinism, you're going to devalue human beings. And that's why Otabenga was picked from Congo and then put in human zoos. I mean, it's just heartbreaking if you read that story, The Astonishing Life of Otabenga, that book that we checked out.
I think I would
Now,
check it out.
as we near talking about his fallacies and then concluding this talk, even as Hitchens complains about the problem of pain and suffering, do you think atheism can give an answer to the problem of pain and suffering? I've always thought to myself, these guys have always attacked Christianity in particular and talked about the evils they have seen in the Old Testament. You actually say you quote Hitchens in your paper, and you say that he actually believes the God of the New Testament is even worse than the God of the Old. When in their complaining about evil, do you think atheism has any coherent or any answer that you can even begin terming as satisfactory when it comes to the problem of pain and suffering?
No, it does not have. Especially with the new atheism, it does not have. At least the old atheism, they tried coming up with such arguments, but they failed. And that's why the new atheists have changed tact because they don't have any argument. They have changed tact. So it does not have any framework to explain the whole aspect of evil. They go on attacking, but they can't give a framework so that we can say, by the way, because we have to grapple with those issues. All of us, the issue of evil, all of us have to, whether you are religious or non religious, all of us have to. But now, I would really desire to see their framework for evil, for ethics, and for morality. I desire to see one. But without that overarching framework, on what ground? Because at some point he says it is apartheid in South Africa was propagated by religious people. In fact, he says the Dutch Reformed Church in South Africa. But now the question is, on what grounds is apartheid religious and the people who fought against apartheid non-religious? On what grounds?
Well, Christians actually.
Yeah, on what grounds? So that is something, that is the gap I see in atheism. And I hope if we are just humble enough, sincere enough, objective enough, we'll come to see there are glaring gaps in atheism than actually theism. We can't explain everything, even as theists. We're still on the journey of knowing the truth. But if I compare the two, I would better be a theist. Even if I'm not a Christian, I'll just better be a theist because it makes more sense. There is this guy O'Connor. I don't know if you know, he's a young guy. He's been doing
Alex
podcasts.
O'Connor, yeah, I know him.
Alex O'Connor, yeah. He's been really against religion. But if you see his recent podcast, he's not yet a Christian, but he came to realize, but then Christianity makes sense because he's interviewed people like Dawkins, top-notch atheists, and also apologists, Christian apologists. And he has come to the conclusion, as is quite objective, I love listening to him, actually Christianity makes sense. I'm not a Christian, and I'm not advocating for Christianity, but in terms of reason, it's because you are seeing the glaring gaps of they keep on attacking religion, but they don't give a competing framework to explain these things. So you are left wondering now, what should I do? Or what ought we to do?
Yeah, he actually says he jumped off the bandwagon of the new atheists.
Ah, yes.
So really, sometimes by there I wonder what answer atheism as a worldview can give to a mother who has just lost a child to cancer.
They do
And I'm
not.
waiting. I'm waiting to see what atheism will give us an answer of the origin of evil and how do we actually deal with it.
And that's why, thank you. And that's why when you read Hitchen's book, he does not in any way talk about the good that has been done by religion. Because now we will give him the task of explaining how did they reach at that point? Why did they do that? So he can't mention that.
You talked about fallacies in your paper, and you say that some of the fallacies that Hitchens commits are like dicta simpliciter, ad hominem. You talked about equivocation. He has a subtle way of shifting words and definitions.
Mm.
But let's just talk about some of them here. Ad hominem, for example. By ad hominem, I understand ad hominem fallacy is attacking someone's character instead of attacking the argument. So will you please shed more light on that? How does that play out in his book, and why is that a problem?
I can give many examples, but I'll only give few. He's more concerned about the moral critique than philosophical arguments. As I said in that paper, he said, reading Hitchens leaves you psychologically charged, but philosophically famished. That's very true. You are charged. You see, he's trying to move your heart, not your head. That's what he's trying to. He's trying to woo you to feel. So he uses very condescending language. So
Yeah.
he does not attack the ideas. He believes in Socrates, but Socrates actually, if you read Socrates, he says we attack the ideas, not the person. But now he does it the other way around. He attacks the person, not the ideas. Just go and look at the language he uses against religious people. In fact, he does not say it, but it's quite explicit in his book. He says, he talks about he hates illiterate people and poor people. And he went ahead and wrote a whole book about Mother Teresa and what she did. In fact, it's Malcolm Muggeridge who brought Mother Teresa to fame. If you can see the language he uses on Malcolm Muggeridge, he says, that silly British evangelist. That really stood out for me. And then he goes ahead talking about Mel Gibson, who directed the movie The Passion of Christ. He uses he says, The Passion of Christ is a soap opera film. That word. And then he says, it was in 2004, a soap opera film about the death of Jesus was produced by an Australian fascist and harm actor Mel Gibson. Mr. Gibson adheres to a crackpot and schematic Catholic sect consisting mainly of himself and of his even more thuggish father. You can see the words. So he uses a condescending language, especially on anyone who seems to be religious. So that is so evident and largely across the book, from the beginning to the end. He attacks people, he attacks religion, but he does not attack the ideas. He attacks the abuse. He does not call it abuse, but he attacks the abuse and the extremes of religion. And as someone said, you don't judge any position or worldview by its abuse. No, you judge a worldview by what it posits, not by its abuse. But now he does it the other way around. You can even go watch their debates. The
You
last
see,
debate I watched was Peter Atkins with John Lennox.
John Lennon.
Yeah, he could not stand up. They could not, and now he ended up using very obscene language.
You see, what is interesting is that these guys preach tolerance, but they do exactly the opposite.
They are the most intolerant.
And condescending language, you can agree with me. Using condescending language doesn't prove anything.
It does not.
It's not an argument. It
It,
doesn't respond to any argument.
yeah, it does not. It's a diversion.
You also talked about him committing strawman fallacies. So strawman fallacies is probably for the people who may not know what a strawman is you caricature someone's argument and then you attack the caricature of that argument. So how is Hitchens guilty of this in his book?
As I said earlier on, you can look at the titles of the chapters. There is how he goes, probably putting it also another way around, that all of us, when you're coming to debates, all of us have strong points and weak points. So one of the things he does is he attacks the weak points, each one of us, the weak points, especially of the problem of pain and suffering. So he goes, as you said, he caricatures that, and then he attacks it, really. But he leaves the fundamental themes of Christianity.
Doesn't deal with the real thing.
He does not deal with the real thing. In fact, when he talked about the Passion of Christ, his death, burial, and resurrection, interestingly, he only calls it murder, that our father murdered his son. But now the cross is the central thing in Christianity. Go tell me something about love. justice, mercy, grace. Please tackle those things. Tackle those things. Talk about sin or evil. Talk about love. Those are the key Christian themes when we're thinking about the cross. But he evades that discussion. He cannot talk about it. So he goes to the weakest point of pain and suffering. That is what he handles. So Hitchens, as I said, intentionally overlooks the crucial themes and looks at the ghastly side of the story. So that is what we see. Then lastly, he also looks at the evil committed by religion and fails also to critique the good that has been done by religion. He fails to do that. Absolutely. Surely not all evils have been committed by religious people, and as you've said, atheism and the fruit of atheism has led to more deaths than actually what religion has done in history. In 20th century alone, how many people died? More than 120 million people because of atheism.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I love what you say here in your paper. You say that he also looks at the evil committed by religions and fails to critique the good that has been done by religion in history. Surely not all evils have been committed by religious people. You said
Yeah.
even matters of like suicide bombing have been associated, which have been associated with the religious people. And you talk about Alistair McGrath, and says that there is more to that. Actually, it is not just a matter of religion. There are also factors that come into those things.
Yes.
As we come to the end, what will be, because I've realized that there's a number of atheists here in Kenya. Will you really say that? Will you say that religion poisons everything? What actually poisons everything? Is it
Good question.
religion or atheism?
No, religion does not poison everything. For me, either atheism does not poison everything, sin poisons everything. Because we've had religious people who've been committed evil, and there have been atheists who have committed evil, all of us. But sin, what sin does is sin poisons everything. But now,
Yeah.
if I think now about Christianity and atheism, I'll say atheism has done much more good than what, sorry, Christianity has done much more good than what atheism has done.
Yeah.
Just
That's a
look.
fact.
Yeah, that's a fact. Just look at your history. Most of the universities in America and Europe were started by Christians. Come to our country. Most of these schools were started by missionaries. Are we against
Mhm.
education? We are not. In fact, we propagate
We are not.
education. We propagate
Talk about the Ivy League universities.
Ivy League
These were
universities.
Christians who built them.
Harvard, Cambridge, Oxford. These were started by Christians. So, best performing schools in Kenya, most of them were started by Christians.
By Christians.
Alliance. I think the only one that was not started by a religious person was Tare. But talk about the others, Kenya High, Akamsinga, what? Most
Mhm.
started by Christians. Religion, unless now you have a wrong definition of religion does not poison everything. Sin does. And now atheism is far much worse if we hold to their position or worldview. It's much more worse than Christianity. Let me not talk about Islam. That is another discussion.
We'll talk about it in the next stream.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Maybe as the last question, what will be your advice to young people who claim to be atheists here? Because my experience has been that these guys that I come across, they don't seem to understand really what Christianity is and the arguments thereof for Christianity. What will be your advice for the young atheists here in Kenya, and also for maybe a Christian who is wondering, how do I begin handling the whole issue of atheism?
This is my advice. I've met several of them, and I met recently two. I came to realize most people, probably not all, because I don't have the data, but most people who believe in atheism, most of them are coming from a certain background, probably of disappointment by religious people, or probably by evil committed by the extremities of religious people. So I would desire, or rather, I would urge these people to look at Christianity in itself and judge it by its own merits and demerits, and look at Christians on the other hand, and probably talk and think about them in a different way. Christians may not practice Christianity as it is, but look at Christianity as it is. So, and then secondly, please read your Bible objectively. Just read your Bible. Don't base your arguments on things you've not understood. Because the Bible is one story. Don't take something out of context, because that is what I see Hitchens doing. He takes a story out of its own context and tries to debunk it. So as I came to an end of that research paper, I said, if Hitchens would have been relatively academic and professional, probably it would have led me to greater research and study. But as it is, I don't think there is any ground to spur me to do any more research on this. So I would urge people to First and foremost, read the Bible objectively from Genesis to Revelation, know what it says, and don't just read to critique, read to understand. In fact, Mortimer Adler said, he came up with a book called How to Read a Book. He said, the best way to understand a book is reading it thrice. The first time is perusing through, the second time is actually now understanding what he's saying. The third time, after reading the third time, then you can critique it and say, he's wrong on this point or he's right on this point. But you can't just, in fact, most of these atheists have never read the Bible. What they hear about Christianity is what they hear in podcasts and social media
And TikTok.
and TikTok. And in fact, I'm not a Muslim, but if I want to critique Islam, I need to read Islam. I need to read the
Absolutely.
Quran. I need to read
Understand.
Muhammad. Yeah, to be objective, yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Nato. This is Socratic discourse where we follow the argument wherever it leads, and that is what we want to encourage everyone. And maybe we would love to end by saying that our God is not dead.
He's not
May
dead.
the Lord
He's
bless
alive.
you. Thank you so much, Nato. It was good having you in our
Thank you.
discussion. So people can watch for our next discussion, which will be on hot issue on Islam, but we are not afraid of talking about those issues. Someone said that good topics must be controversial, and
Yes.
our aim is finding the truth.
Yes.
So if someone wants to read your paper, they can actually reach out, check the email there, email, and then we can see how you can get the paper and read it for yourself. Thank you for your time, and God bless.
Thank you. God bless you too.